Europe faces many obstacles in terms of military autonomy. Source: Stephen M. Walt, Why Europe Can't Get Its Military Act Together. Foreign policy. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has sounded the alarm bell in Europe when he said at a campaign rally that he would encourage Russia to do whatever they want to any country he deemed not fulfilling its defense obligations. European countries were already worried about the possibility of Mr. Trump being re-elected for a second term, and these latest statements have increased that concern. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told the Financial Times a few days later that Europe was facing an increasingly harsher world and we have to spend more, spend well more and spend in the European way. But the question remains, is Europe doing enough to protect itself? Complaints that European nations rely too much on American protection and are unwilling to maintain adequate defenses are long-standing, and the wake-up call from Russia's attack on Ukraine 2022 has yet to produce a significant increase in Europe's available military power. In fact, NATO members are now spending more money, and the EU recently approved an additional €50 billion in financial support for Ukraine. But Europe's ability to keep large forces on the battlefield for more than a few weeks remains limited. It remains dependent on the United States for some key capabilities, and some NATO members have reason to doubt whether their partners could come to their aid if they were attacked, even if they tried. The tone of European officials is certainly becoming increasingly harsher. Danish Defence Minister Troels Lund Poulsen recently warned that Russia could test NATO's collective defence clause within 3 to 5 years, and another senior NATO diplomat believes that it is no longer possible to think that Russia will stop at Ukraine. According to another senior diplomat, Russia's intention and capability to attack a NATO country by 2030 is almost a general consensus within the alliance at this point. Since it may take Europe 10 years or more to develop enough of its own capabilities, hardline Atlanticists want to maintain America's commitment to Europe despite all the competing demands. Competing for time, attention, and resources from the US. So can Europe be militarily independent? There are two well-known branches of theory that are relevant here. The first is balance of power theory, or balance of threat theory, to which I have attempted to contribute in part. This theory predicts that a serious external threat to European security, such as a neighboring power with a powerful military and ambitions to revise the international order, would cause most this nation joins forces to contain that threat, or if necessary, defeat it. This impulse would be stronger if these countries understood that they could not depend on anyone else for protection. The recent increases in European defense budgets and the decisions of Sweden and Finland to join NATO perfectly illustrate the tendency for threatened states to seek balance, and this tendency makes them we are more optimistic about Europe's ability and willingness to take more responsibility for its own security. Unfortunately, the second branch of theory makes that optimistic result more uncertain. Because security is a collective good, states in an alliance will be tempted to circumvent or benefit from the efforts of others, in the hope that their partners will do enough to keep themselves safe and secure, even if they themselves contribute less. This tendency helps explain why the strongest members of a coalition tend to contribute a disproportionate amount to the overall effort. If the leading members of the alliance do enough to prevent or defeat an attack, then the contributions of the smallest members are redundant. After all, the alliance wouldn't be much stronger even if they redoubled their efforts. Hence the temptation to contribute less in the belief that the larger members will do enough for their own benefit. However, if enough members succumb to the temptation to let others bear a greater burden, or if other selfish interests outweigh the need to cooperate, the coalition may not be able to create synergies and the coordinated strategy needed to ensure security. Taken together, these two famous theories underscore the dilemma facing NATO right now. The good news is that NATO's European members have much greater hidden power potential than Russia. These countries have 3 to 4 times the population and a total economy 10 times larger than Russia's. Some European countries still have sophisticated arms industries, capable of producing excellent weapons, and some countries, e.g. Germany, possess powerful ground and air forces. Strong in the final stages of the Cold War. More strikingly, NATO's European members alone spend at least 3 times more on defense than Russia each year. Even if we take into account higher personnel costs, duplication of effort and other weaknesses, and assuming that latent capacity is properly mobilized and led, Europe has more than enough potential to prevent or defeat a Russian attack. Plus, the Russian military is not a giant. Although Russia's military performance and defense production capacity have improved significantly since the start of the war in Ukraine, it still faces challenges. The difficulty of defeating a smaller and less well-armed Ukrainian army. An army that spent months simply capturing Bakhmut or Avdiivka could not carry out a successful blitzkrieg against anyone else. The bad news is that the persistent effort to build a capable European defense force faces significant obstacles. First, NATO's European members do not agree on the extent or even the primary issue of their security. For the Baltic states and Poland, Russia is clearly the greatest danger. However, for Spain or Italy, Russia is a distant problem and illegal migration is the bigger challenge. Contrary to some analysts, I do not believe this situation prevents Europe from building an effective defense system against Russia, but it does raise issues of burden sharing and military planning. More complex. Getting Portugal to support Estonia more will take some convincing. Next, those who want Europe to do more face a dilemma. They have to convince people that there is a serious problem, but they also have to convince people that solving the problem will not be too costly, poor or difficult. If they try to mobilize support for a major defense build-up by exaggerating Russia's military capabilities and portraying Vladimir Putin as a maniac with limitless ambition, then the challenge that Europe face what seems insurmountable and the temptation to rely on America will increase. But if Russia's power and ambitions are perceived to be more modest and therefore easier to deal with, it will be harder to convince the European public to make large immediate sacrifices and to sustain a serious effort over time. For autonomy to work effectively, Europeans must believe that Russia is dangerous, but they must also believe that they are capable of solving the problem even if the United States significantly reduces its role. For this reason, asserting that Europe cannot defend itself to maintain America's full commitment could be counterproductive, if it prevents a serious European and American effort to reduce your commitment. The third problem is the ambiguous role of nuclear weapons. If you really believe that nuclear weapons prevent large-scale aggression, then you would think that the nuclear forces of Britain and France along with the US nuclear shield would protect NATO from a Russian attack in almost every case. It's worth mentioning that Ukraine is not a NATO member. And if so, then the need to build a large and costly array of conventional forces would be reduced. However, if you have little confidence in the reliability of an extended nuclear deterrent, or you don't want to have to threaten to use nuclear power in response to a low-level challenge, then you'll want the flexibility that a capable conventional force possesses. This issue was a point of contention within NATO throughout the Cold War, as the intra-alliance debates over flexible response in the 1960s and the Euro missile controversy in the 1980s demonstrate. This issue remains relevant today, as the continued presence of nuclear weapons may cause some countries to relax the development of their conventional forces. Fourth, European countries still prefer to invest in their own defense industries and armed forces instead of cooperating to standardize weapons and develop common defense strategies and plans. According to a 2023 report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, although total European defense spending has increased sharply since Russia occupied Crimea in 2014, the proportion devoted to purchasing efforts cooperation procurement decreased steadily until 2021 and never reached nearly 35% of the target previously set by the EU. EU countries are said to possess about 178 different weapons systems, 148 more systems than the US, despite spending less than the US. This inherent tendency towards self-reliance squanders the huge potential resource advantage that Europe has over potential competitors, and may be a luxury that Europe can no longer afford. The final obstacle, at least for now, is America's long-standing ambiguity in encouraging European autonomy. America often wants European partners to be militarily strong, but not too strong, and politically united, but not too united. Why so? Because this arrangement is dark assimilate American influence over an alliance of capable but dependent partners. Washington wants the rest of NATO to be strong enough to be useful but also fully compliant with American wishes, and compliance will be harder to maintain if these countries become stronger and begin to have a say. The desire to keep Europe dependent and docile has led successive American administrations to oppose any steps that might lead to genuine European strategic autonomy. However, those days may be coming to an end. It doesn't take a Trump supporter to realize that America can't have it all and needs to shift some of the burden of collective defense to its European partners. But as the past has shown, Europe will not shoulder the responsibility if its leaders still believe that America will go all out in any case. It is worth remembering that the initial impetus for European economic integration in the early 1950s was driven in part by European fears that the United States would eventually withdraw from the continent and possible resistance to the Entente. Warsaw will be strengthened by the creation of a strong and unified European economic order. The security impulse behind European integration eased as it became clear that the United States would stay, but growing doubts about America's commitment would create ample incentives for Europeans to mobilize their economic capacity beyond their superiority and hidden military potential more effectively, purely for their own benefit. American officials should encourage this development, regardless of who occupies the White House next year. As I have argued before, the process of returning European security to Europeans should be gradual, as part of a new transatlantic division of labor. Reducing dependence on the United States will make Europe a stronger balance, and slow but steady progress in this direction will give America's allies time to overcome the difficult collective action situations that are sure to arise. Because European countries have significantly more military potential than Russia, they do not need to accomplish this perfectly to ensure absolute security. Stephen M. Walt is a columnist at Foreign Policy and the Robert and Renee Belfer Professor of International Affairs at Harvard University.